My name is Richard Hartnell. I am a member of the Bellingham Circus Guild. I am, in fact, here to present you with something a little different. It's my pleasure to take up some time before the next act gets set up and everything. While we're getting set up, I would like to maybe invite anybody who wants to come a little closer to the stage, This act is best seen from up front. If you want to kind of cozy up, bring those chairs a little closer. If you're far away, you should still be able to see. I did live in a warehouse with like 15 other circus people, but I do have a little personal space still. Yeah, just back a little bit. These things are preset at the factory to gravitate toward the skulls of small children. So laptops and cups of coffee as well. Okay, how do I not breathe into this constantly? Yeah, roommates love contact jugglers. I have a screenshot of a friend's neighborhood wireless networks, and one of them is called "Whatever You're Throwing on the Floor Upstairs, Stop It." All right, so I've got my friend getting plugged in here. Please, a little round of applause for my friend Aaron Shea, who will be providing a little bit of background music for this act. This act is a special act to me. It's one I've presented far and wide, but not very often. I'm really glad to be able to bring it to you here. It's an act sort of about things I've learned through juggling, because anybody who practices art very deeply understands that it gives you superpowers if you practice well and properly. So this act is a bit about that. The act, like many acts, has a name. The name of the act is Richard Hartnell's Fantasy Through Science, Technology, and the Fate of Human Progress, as told in multi-ball contact juggling tricks. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's also a bit of a handful. You'll see what I mean by that in a moment. And like many acts, this act is a story. And like all stories, it begins at the beginning with one. Now, one is a number, right? It's the number of unity. It's the number of wholeness. And it's a number that exists somewhat by fiat. And by that I mean, if I say I have one thing, suddenly you have more things. Sorry, kid, when you practice long and hard for years and years, you can have your very own show. Thanks for being the parent with taste to not let their kids run up and grab strangers' balls in public. Parents, if your kids laughed at that joke, it's not my fault. All right, so one is a number. It's a number that exists by fiat, and by that I mean if I have one thing, you know I don't have no things, you know I don't have many things, right? So let's say for a minute we're back in high school geometry class, or for some of you and the hippies, you're in the future in geometry class. And we have a plane here, a plane in space. And this might be one point in space. Now I can move this point to different places to create the illusion of a shape. Let's say a square. But without any other points, there's no length, no width, and no depth. The square is an illusion. You with me so far? Okay, great. If you're not, just pay attention to the tricks. Now, of course, I'm fudging a bit for playability, right? Because this isn't a point with no dimensions. It's a sphere in three-dimensional space, where every point on the edge of the sphere is the same distance from the center of the object. And it's by exploiting the understanding of the sphere that tricky contact jugglers can create the illusions that give contact juggling its signature look and feel. Right? Thank you. Now, if we take two identical zero-dimensional points and place them parallel to each other in space, we achieve the first dimension, length. We have a line. And we can move this line by moving one point, or by moving 2 points, or we can keep the point stationary and manipulate the manipulator. Now, if 1 is the number of unity, and 2 is the number of duality, then by adding a third object, we get to 3, the number of trinity. Regardless of your personal spiritual attachments, this trinity, This triangle is found ubiquitously everywhere in the universe. This could be CO2, the gas we exhale in every breath. It could be H2O, the water we drink on a hot festival day. Or for the chemists in the audience, it could be any trigonal planar molecule, right? Right, thank you. There's always one. Yeah, stay in school. Now, in the same way we could get from the 0th dimension to the 1st dimension by taking two identical points, placing them parallel to each other in space to create a line, we can take two one-dimensional lines, place them parallel in space to achieve the 2nd dimension. And now we have both length and width. But another thing happens. Another strange accident where everything you can do with two in one hand, you can do twice in two hands, but both parallel and asynchronously. So as the system complexifies, it gains new powers, and new dimensions come out. And of course, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Now again, I'm fudging for the sake of playability also, because as we three-dimensional creatures know, a line and a rectangle are not the only shapes you can make with 4 points. So let's test the hypothesis. That brings us to the fundamental hypothesis of this piece, which is that every system, as it gains more pieces, gains in both power and flexibility. So let's test it. Let us add a couple of more points here and see what we're on to. Well, right away we see the same principle emerging, where everything you can do with 2 in one hand, you can do twice with 4, and everything you can do with 3 in one hand, you can do twice with 6 in 2 hands. And again, these can spin synchronously or asynchronously. And again, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But another funny thing happens here. In the same way that we gained rhythm when we went from 3 to 4, now everything I could do with 4 balls on one plane, I can do with 6 balls in a different dimension. So the hypothesis would seem to check out. That as we add more pieces to a system, it makes more gains in power and flexibility. It does cooler stuff, and it works in higher dimensions. It's sort of like Isaac Asimov wrote. Oops, there. Sort of like Isaac Asimov wrote. Could you build a computer the size of the universe and then run the universe on it? Well, let's try. Well, now we have a great big system. It's very complex. It does a lot of cool stuff. It works in higher and higher dimensions than ever before. Now we can work in strange z-axes and new higher dimensions than before, but we start having to ask some difficult questions. We run into some problems. We have to ask questions like, how many fingers do you have? How many expensive props can you afford? How many hours a day can you practice? Right? That kind of stuff. We run into issues like scaffolding, right? Where you have tricks that take long strings of other more difficult tricks just to take you where you want to go. And like so many complexifying systems, you run into these final thresholds where sometimes you can build something and you're not really sure how to take it apart again. And you're stuck. what do? You know, entropy always wins, right? Like all things, this too shall pass. So sometimes you reach a threshold where, you know, your stamina is the determinant of your participation, but you have to face the inevitable consequences of the explosion, or the meltdown, or the spill. But I'm optimistic. I don't think that as science progresses on, as technology continues to outpace us slowly biologically evolving organisms in its rate of evolution, I don't think that we're necessarily destined as a species to poison ourselves or to irradiate ourselves or to blow ourselves up. And here's why. Because in juggling, just like in science, practice begets mastery. And the impossible tricks of yesterday become the simple tricks of today. And through mastery, maybe cultivation of the right perspective, a hard-to-handle system can be potentially transformed, metamorphed into something a little easier to handle. Maybe even a system that makes the old ones look barbaric by comparison. And ultimately, throughout history, the true masters have understood that no matter how complex or dangerous or strange, every system, seen from the right perspective and with a little bit of practice, can be deconstructed into its constituent pieces with no problems whatsoever. Thanks very much, y'all. Thanks to Aaron Shea.